Hey, welcome back to the channel. So I get a lot of questions from students about the nature of suffering. People come with this really deep existential question, usually after a lot of their own experience, but sometimes just out of a really deep curiosity about why do we suffer? Why is it that life seems hard, challenging, kind of laden with challenging experiences? And that's a really core question to the yogic or a spiritual life, because oftentimes people only turn to asking deeper existential questions in the face of suffering. If everything is going like really, really well, you have a lot of money, you're surrounded by people, you have a lot of distractions, you're, on and on. Often people just put their head down and live life. And so the question about suffering usually is inherent in this turning towards deeper existential and spiritual questioning. So I can answer that question in a lot of different ways, but one thing that seems really helpful, I study often the Bhagavad Gita and sit with that text and go back and forth to this dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. And one of the things that comes up in that text over and over, and then is reiterated in almost every spiritual path that I've studied, is the idea that suffering comes from misidentification. We suffer as humans when we become attached to transient things. So when we become identified with first the ego, but maybe even before the ego, we become identified with material objects, with this physical world, and we forget a true nature, which is our consciousness. That is the root of suffering. In a yogic lens, that's called Avidya, and A means the kind of inverse of or negating of, and Vidya is knowledge. So the lack of knowledge, or in a lot of texts it's said ignorance of our true nature. So if you don't know that you are consciousness, you begin to compulsively and obsessively identify with things that are transient. And that becomes the root of suffering. So until we can turn back towards self-knowledge, consciousness, this root of who we truly are, suffering just multiplies, because we begin to identify with those things that will change. So I get identified with Brian, and Brian does this, Brian does that, and anything that is opposed to that or interrupts that or goes against how I think it should be and how I want it to be, I suffer. Because that is then the kind of play of craving and aversion, where I'm averse to anything that goes against how I perceive Brian to be and what Brian therefore wants. So averse to that, and then that incessant opposite force, or the kind of opposing force of just craving, craving, craving. So, but again, back to the core thing, and this is where this video kind of starts, which is, why do we suffer? What is suffering? Suffering is when we forget. If you know consciousness, if you're able to sit in meditation and experience true quietude and feel not an intellectual connection with, but a truly felt, an affective and experiential kind of connection to that which goes beyond the transient nature, there can't be suffering. There can't be suffering, because only there is there peace, joy, bliss, knowledge, self-knowledge. And so there is the answer. It's a little long to get there, but this is the lifetime of practice and of perseverance, is to answer that question. Why do we suffer, and how do we get out of suffering? So There's a lot more to be said about it. More videos will kind of go into the depths of what is craving and aversion, what are these patterns, what is ego. But if you're looking for the answer to why am I suffering, it's because we've forgotten. And that's kind of human. That's rather universal. Most people forget. So the beautiful thing, the point where we have agency, is now you get to remember. Now you get to awaken to that knowledge that we have forgotten. So I hope that this is a helpful message. I hope that this gives some kind of solidity to that question in terms of, why do I keep suffering? Why do I keep having painful experiences? And that's what this whole channel is about, is helping you to move to that awakened state, help you to move towards more self-knowledge. So good luck in your practices. Always here. Please reach out if you want to connect about any of these topics, and have a wonderful day.